Okay, hey everybody. My name is Dave Munger, and I'm a librarian with Sacramento Public Library. Welcome to this month's genealogy workshop, Marriage by Blacksmith, Gretna Green Marriages. Okay, now I'm just going to repeat a few quick notes before we get started. All microphones have been muted to limit distraction. I'll change the setting to let you unmute yourself after the talk concludes so you can ask questions of our speaker, Madeline Yanov. Today's session will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel indefinitely. I'll put the link to our YouTube channel in the chat because we are posting this video. For privacy reasons, we will not enable you to turn on your own video. If you have technical issues during the presentation, please send me a message directly in the chat and I'll do my best to help. I will also note all questions to be asked during the Q&A after the presentation. For questions about future genealogy presentations or to receive a copy of the handout, please email contact@saclibrary.org. I'll also post a copy of the handout to the chat for download. Okay, now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Madeline Yanov. Madeline Yanov, the owner of Time Travel Genealogy, has more than 30 years of genealogy experience, specializing in American research. Since most Americans are descendants of immigrants, she is very familiar with European genealogy, specifically Irish, British, the Slovak region, and Russian with a little German on the side. She also has been instrumental in locating and helping reunite adoptees with their birth parents. In her other life, before becoming a full-time genealogist, Madeline was a paralegal whose expertise included the discovery for cases. This experience helped her in genealogy by analyzing what to search for and how to find it. She has a degree in history and political science and uses those disciplines to tell the stories of her clients' ancestors. Madeline believes that genealogy is more than just names and dates. It's the stories behind our ancestors' lives that make them real to us. She was a weekly volunteer at the Oakland, California Regional Family History Center until May 2023. Since 2011, she has been an indexer with FamilySearch.org. In 2012, Madeline was elected to the board of directors of the Contra Costa County Genealogical Society and is currently the president emeritus of that society. She also represents the Contra Costa County Genealogical Society and the Sacramento Regional Genealogical Council and the East Bay North Bay Genealogy Networking Group. In addition to being a member of various local genealogical societies, she is a member of APG, the Association of Professional Genealogists. Madeline loves traveling, meeting people, hearing their family stories, and sharing her love of history and genealogy with anyone interested. Her presentation today is Marriage by Blacksmith, Gretna Green Marriages. Madeline, I'll pass the virtual mic to you now.
Thanks, Dave. Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming. My name is Madeline Yanov, and today I hope to help you look for some missing marriage records. So what do you do if you can't find your ancestors' marriage in the area or the state that you think they're living in? You know, you've looked in your usual databases, you've contacted the county and the state for possible clues, but they just aren't there. So where do you look then? Have you ever thought that maybe your ancestor may have run off and eloped somewhere? These places are known as Gretna Greens, and today we're going to look at these places, starting with the original Gretna Green in Scotland, find out why it became famous, and then we're going to find some Gretna Greens closer to home in the United States. So let me just share my screen with you. And there we go. For those of you that have never heard me speak before, I give a lot of information. I really have a crash course in the subject. So not all the topics and sources I'm going to show you are going to help you find your marriage records that are missing. I can't guarantee that we will find yours, but I do know that by the time we finish, you're going to have a great idea of the history of Gretna Greens and the possible ways you can find your ancestors' missing records. And if any of you have an ancestor or a relative that got married at a Gretna Green, please share your story with us after the presentation. I would love to hear it. Okay. Well, this is great. It worked in rehearsal, but it's not working now. There we go. What we're going to cover today is some definitions you're going to need to know. What the English marriage laws before 1753 were, and the abuses that arose from them, abuses that led to the English Marriage Act of 1753, and how Scottish marriage laws were a lot different. We're going to find out why Gretna Green, what was so special about that place and not other towns. Were the marriages that were performed there, were they even legal? I mean, you have people coming from one country to another. Is this going to hold up in their country? And then you're going to find out there actually were some other European Gretna Greens besides the one in Scotland. Then we're going to cross the pond, as they say, and look for Gretna Greens in the US. We're going to find out the reasons that people eloped, why certain locations became Gretna Greens and not others. You're going to find out what a marriage mill is and what gen marriage laws were and how did they help create American Gretna Greens. We're going to then search and find the records that could possibly hold the information you're looking for. And finally, I'm going to give you some tips to remember. Tips when searching for missing marriage records. Now, again, I can't promise you're going to find those marriage records, but I believe you're going to get ideas and hopefully clues, so you're going to be more productive in your research. So let's go with some definitions. The definition of elopement is a lot different than what we think it is. By the 18th century, the term elopement had a very different definition than today. The term was coined in the 1300s, and it originally meant a married person, usually a woman, who ran away to live with her lover. Over time, it evolves to describe two single people who run away to get married. The historic definition of a Gretna Green is a place known for its minimal legal requirements to get married. And that is going to appeal to people looking for easy marriages. The term is going to originate from the Scottish town, Gretna Green, which drew many English couples looking for a quick wedding. The common definition of a Gretna Green now is any marriage location that has looser requirements and regulations than the area where you live. One thing you're going to need to know is what is an irregular marriage. An irregular marriage is a marriage where certain requirements that are needed for a marriage are not met. And a clandestine marriage is a marriage with no prior notification of the intent of the couple to get married. And it's going to take place outside the residence of the groom and the bride. So basically, it's a secret marriage. Hence, the name clandestine. The town of Gretna Green was a very sleepy little hamlet until they erected a post road put in between London and Edinburgh. Now people could get to Gretna Green on their way to Edinburgh. Gretna Green is the first village in Scotland 2 miles over the English-Scottish border. So it's the first one that you could reach by that post road.
Madeline, can I interrupt you for a moment? We've had a
Yes.
couple people say that they're having a little trouble hearing you. Maybe you can turn your sound up if possible.
Oh, I did, but I will be very happy to do it again. Yeah. I have it almost up to 100%.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think you
Well,
want to go beyond that. It's plenty loud enough for me, and I don't have my
yeah.
sound turned all the way up.
Well, if we run into another problem, please um, feel free to let me know.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So Gretna Green is located in the Dumfries and Galloway area of Scotland. Basically, it's 66 miles south of Edinburgh, and it's 270 miles northwest of London. So if you read a novel or see a movie where they're escaping to go to Gretna Green, just know that unless they lived in northern England, it was going to take them quite a while, maybe even up to a couple of days to reach Gretna Green because it was so far from London. Huh. Okay. So we're going to talk about the marriage requirements in England before 1753. I'm not going to go back to when Christianity was introduced into England. We're just really going to just before the Major Marriage Act in 1753. There were just a couple of minimum requirements to get married. You had to be 21 years old. Both parties had to be 21. But you could get married at 16 if you had your parental or guardian permission. You needed 2 witnesses to attest to the marriage, and the marriage had to be performed by any ordained Anglican priest. Now, this is going to lead to a lot of abuses because even defrocked priests would be able to marry people, as we're going to find out. So those were the minimums. There were bans, but you didn't necessarily need to post bans back then if you had a license. So what we have on the screen is basically the bare minimum. The problem with a marriage performed by any ordained Anglican priest was that, as I said, even a defrocked priest could perform the marriage because at one point they had been ordained. This is going to lead to a lot of abuses, such as irregular and clandestine marriages. By 1740, over half of all marriages in London were either irregular or clandestine. So we're not talking the church, we're not talking the bands. These, half of all the marriages were in secret, or there was some irregularity with them. One of the more famous irregular and clandestine marriages would be performed at the Fleet Prison Chapel. Now, these are called Fleet marriages. Sometimes they're called Fleet Street marriages. Now, Fleet Prison was not on Fleet Street. It got its name from the Fleet River, which ran nearby. So these marriages are performed by ministers that are thrown in the prison. Fleet Prison was a debtor's prison, and it was also a prison for people that had minor criminal acts like contempt of court and so on. So the ministers that were inside the prison, they were not allowed to perform marriages. But for the right amount of money, they would perform your marriage, no questions asked. And there were other clandestine marriage locations in London too. There was Mayfair Chapel in the Mayfair district of London. There was Bow Church in Cheapside. Now, Cheapside was an area of London that was mainly known for its very active marketplace. And this is where you had fishmongers selling their fish, you had tradesmen selling their products. This is where commerce was king. And as a result, the upper class would look down on this area and the people that lived there. But it didn't necessarily stop them from getting married in these clandestine locations. And then you have St. James Chapel, Duke's Place. Now, this was a little bit different than other churches because most of the churches fell under the jurisdiction of the Bishop of London. St. James Chapel did not, because it was not part of the administration, the ecclesiastical administration in England. The church itself had been gifted to the city of London. So because it was outside the jurisdiction of the Bishop of London, they felt they didn't have to follow the regulations. So there were so many abuses that were taking place. In 1753, a law was created to sort of tighten up the rules. It's known as the English Marriage Law of 1753. Sometimes it's also known as the Clandestine Marriage Act of 1753. But more popularly, it's called Lord Hardwicke's Marriage Act, because he was the one that sponsored it. What it did was it tightened up their age requirements. So now everyone had to be 21. And this only applied in England and Wales. It did not apply in Scotland or Ireland. And if the parent of a guard or guardian of someone under 21, if they objected to it, they could veto the marriage. It was created having banns being read 3 consecutive Sundays before marriage. And this was to make sure that if there were any objections to the marriage, it would give people time to come forward. This is the thing that drove, the next thing is the one that drove a lot of people away. All marriages had to be performed by an Anglican priest in an Anglican church for every denomination, except for Jews and Quakers. So in other words, let's say you were Catholic. You could get married in a Catholic church, but in England, it would not be valid, and any children from that union would be illegitimate. So if you wanted to make sure that you kept your property and you wanted to make sure that your children were not considered illegitimate, you had to have a second marriage in an Anglican church performed by an Anglican priest. So everyone that got married got married in an Anglican church. And as I said, there were some exceptions made for Jews and Quakers. Now, the next feature is something that's really beneficial for genealogists. Both parties to the marriage had to sign a marriage register with their names, where they were from, and the date. This meant there were going to be no more clandestine or secret marriages. This is now a record that was kept at the church. Now it's kept at the civil offices and the archives. But now we have a register. We can say, oh, they got married on such and such a day. Now, a lot of people didn't like this law. So to circumvent it, there were 2 ways you could get around it. A couple could obtain a special license from the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, that usually required a donation to the church. And usually only the wealthy or nobles could afford that. So they were the only ones that were really able to get a special license at that time. If you were middle class or lower class and you didn't want to have to follow the new laws, you would elope to Gretna Green. Now, marriages in Scotland are a lot more lenient than England. You could get married by declaration, or what's known as hand fasting. The ages for marriage in Scotland were 14 for males and 12 for females without parental consent. Now I know we're sort of astounded at these ages now. It, would be like child abuse, but not back then. You had to declare yourself free to marry. In other words, the groom couldn't have another wife stashed in another village. You had to be free of any obstacle to marry. You had to declare yourself as husband and wife in front of 2 witnesses. You didn't have to take up banns. You just had to declare that I accept you as my husband. I take you as my wife in front of 2 witnesses. Now, Scotland recognized irregular marriages. So they would recognize a marriage with no ceremony or no clergyman. So what's special about Gretna Green? Why that over anything else? Well, as I said, the town was the first one reached on the post road from England to Scotland. Now, there were other towns that also did clandestine marriages too. Lamberton was one. Coldstream was another. But Gretna was the most famous. And later on, it became even more famous because once the town started getting the publicity that people would be coming to it to run away and get married, the whole town joined in to promote it as a romantic elopement center. In fact, they're still doing it today. So why the blacksmith? Well, there was a little bit of symbolism with that. Blacksmiths were usually open most days. They were a very integral part of the town. And so you could usually get to them whenever you needed it. It would be a very discreet ceremony. You couldn't tell if a man was walking into the blacksmith shop whether he wanted the blacksmith to create something in metal for him, whether he was picking up something, or whether he was going to get married. So it would be very discreet. There was not a lot of fanfare around it or publicity. The anvil that the blacksmith used to strike metal on would help make the metal stronger and unbreakable. And so it was the symbol of an unbreakable and lasting union. The couple would extend their hands over the anvil, and the blacksmith would strike it. And the idea was their union, their marriage was going to be unbreakable, just like the metal that is struck on the anvil. Remember, I said that they needed 2 witnesses? The blacksmith is both a witness and a facilitator. So all they had to do was find someone else off the street. They could have their 2 witnesses. So he was both a witness and the one who married them. Blacksmiths were not the only ones to perform marriages. Innkeepers could also do that. But because Gretna Green was romanticized in literature and the blacksmith seemed like an unlikely person to wed people, he became synonymous with Gretna Green marriages. But just know that he wasn't the only person that could perform the marriages. Gretna Green and the information and ideas that we have about it is basically due to the literature that was written about it. It became synonymous with romance and runaway lovers. It was popularized in the fiction of the time. Jane Austen popularized it in 3 of her novels, including Pride and Prejudice. Other authors referred to it too, authors like Agatha Christie, Georgette Heyer, and TV shows like Downton Abbey also referenced it. It was featured in multiple British soap operas. And as I was telling David before this meeting began, there was also a 1915 silent film that was created about Gretna Green. So it became an lasting part of British literature and American literature as a result. So thank you, Jane Austen, and all of the other writers. So are Gretna Green marriages legal? Yes and no. Yes, they're legal in Scotland under Scottish laws. No, in the beginning, they were not considered legal in England under English law. However, once the marriage was consummated, it was recognized. And over time, English and Scottish laws would close the loopholes until finally the two countries were in sync. I spent over 2 years trying to find out if there were any other Gretna Greens in Europe, because it just seemed impossible to me that there was only one place in the whole continent that you could run away and get married. And I actually did find a couple of places. There's another place in Scotland called Old House Chapel, which is in East Kilbride. And the chapel operated as a priest's house, because you could get married in a house and you wouldn't have the significance of a church attached to it. So people could get married without public notice by just going to the priest's house. In 18th century, there were English couples that sometimes went to Portugal and Gibraltar. Now, Gibraltar was a territory of England. And so they would go there because Gibraltar had very lax marriage laws. You could get married without parental consent. In the south of France, you also had relaxed marriage laws in the 18th and 19th century. A lot of people went from France and other parts of Europe because they wanted to marry without all of the requirements of their home regions. And this last one, Heligoland in Germany, I actually just found a week ago, so I had to add this at the last minute. This is a little island off of Germany, and people would go there to get married because the officials would turn a blind eye to the fact that maybe you didn't have all your proper paperwork that was required in the rest of the country. And if you swore an oath saying that you attest to, what's on the missing paperwork is true, they'd let it slide. And they were known for letting things slide. And as far as bans go, they cut it down to 1 day. So you could arrive on a Saturday night, the band would be on Sunday, and you would leave Monday morning married. And a lot of the people that did go there went to escape those long legal notices and all the requirements that were in Germany. And this is an article about Heligoland from 1888. Now let's go and find some Gretna Greens in the United States. A Gretna Green can be any place that has looser marriage regulations than your own hometown. So it can be a small town or a large city like Chicago and New York. This clipping is about several couples from Kentucky that went over to Cairo, Illinois to get married. Now, Cairo is the southernmost city in Illinois, and it's not far from the Kentucky border. A Gretna Green in the United States would probably be someplace that had easy access to transportation, especially if there was a train route to the Gretna Green. Sometimes military posts on the frontier were Gretna Greens. Fort Crown Point in New York and Fort Southwest Point in Tennessee were Gretna Greens. And the reason was there are looser regulations on the frontier. People are going to be more willing to overlook things, and there weren't as many regulations as it would be out in the larger cities. A lot of towns along the Ohio and the Mississippi and the Missouri and the Connecticut and the Hudson River also were known as Gretna Greens. Now, the places are going to become popular, or they're going to fade into obscurity depending upon the date. Places that were Gretna Greens weren't Gretna Greens forever. So you have to check the year that you think your ancestor was getting married, and the laws for that particular state at the time. And we're going to go into that in a little bit. Why would people get married? Well, a lot of the reasons are no different than now. They would go to a Gretna Green because they could get married at a younger age. There might not be any long residency requirements. As states started tightening up their requirements, like residency or waiting periods or blood tests, then you start seeing people moving to other states to get married. So they might leave because they don't want to take a blood test or paperwork. They might search out a Gretna Green because they want to avoid paying a marriage bond. I found the marriage bond that my grandfather had posted in 1912 when he married my grandmother. And he posted it for $1,200. Well, the idea is if you and the bondsman post money, that's to sort of guarantee that you're going to show up at the wedding. And if you skip town and you don't, you forfeit that money. Well, maybe they didn't want to pay that money in the beginning. So they didn't have a lot of money, so they wanted to avoid paying a marriage bond. Maybe they wanted to keep the marriage secret, no family interference. The clipping on this slide tells of Finley Thomas, who was the youngest son of a millionaire in Ohio. He was a manufacturer and a railroad man. And he eloped to Newport, Kentucky, which was a Gretna Green. And the reason they eloped and went to a Gretna Green was, according to the newspaper, the secrecy was due to the objection of the groom's parents, who interfered 2 months earlier when he had planned to marry the girl, having even secured a marriage license. You go to a Gretna Green to keep your marriage secret. Sometimes people wanted just a very inexpensive wedding. They didn't want a big deal, and so they would elope for that reason. Sometimes it would allow them to marry a cousin closer than the law in their own state would allow. I had a girlfriend when I was in high school that I found out that her parents were first cousins. Now, this is after you take biology, high school biology, and, you're thinking all these, things like, oh my goodness, she's going to turn out to be, deformed or something like that. There's something wrong with her because they're first cousins. Illinois would not allow them to get married because they were closer than law allowed. So most likely they did go out of the state to get married to a state that had looser requirements. So why certain locations? Why did certain locations become Gretna Greens and not others? Well, it had to do with whether or not you were a conservative or a liberal state. And I'm not talking politics. I'm talking about whether or not you had very tight marriage laws or very loose marriage laws. That's going to make a big difference. Was there a Gretna Green close to home? It might be close to your home, maybe across the river or the state line. Maybe the county seat of the adjoining county might be closer to where you live than your own county seat. Was it a state or a county that had no residency requirement? That would make it more attractive. How about no waiting period? Maybe a lower age limit than what your state has. Maybe they didn't require a blood test or medical testing. While some people wanted it close to home, maybe some people wanted it a little bit further from home so there would be no family interference. Was it near a train route? Because until you started having a lot of traffic, especially on interstates, most people took a train to get places. Check train routes, see where they went from where your ancestor lived to other towns along the route. Locations changed with time. Illinois had a 3-day waiting period. So a lot of people who didn't want to wait between getting a license and getting married went over the Wisconsin state line to Kenosha, Wisconsin to get married. Now in 1893, Chicago was going to hold the World's Fair. It was going to be the 400th anniversary of Columbus discovering America. So the Illinois legislature passed a law just for the World's Fair. It eliminated the 3-day waiting period for out-of-state fairgoers. I mean, they figured everybody from the world is going to come here. It's a World's Fair. And so what better way to promote Chicago than to tell people who came from Pennsylvania that you can come in the morning and view all the fair attractions and get married that same day. Or you can get married in the morning and then spend the rest of your day viewing the fair attractions. But they waived that 3-day waiting period for anybody that came to the fair. Now, that was only good for the time that the fair was open, from May to October of 1893. After that, people went back to Wisconsin. Now, when Wisconsin passes a residency requirement, people leave Kenosha and they go to Waukegan, Illinois. Now, Waukegan is just before you get to the Illinois-Wisconsin border. Now, that lasts until 1937, when Illinois starts requiring blood tests. At that point, people decide to go to Crown Point, Indiana. And that was until the 1950s when Indiana changed its marriage laws. So you can see the locations are going to change with time. Oh, and I forgot to say that during World War II, Chicago relaxed its requirements, because actually it was Illinois that relaxed the requirements. So a lot of young servicemen that are just about to be shipped off could marry their sweetheart before they have to leave for the front. So the locations are going to change with time, and that's why you need to know what the laws are at any one particular time. A marriage mill is a business that provides a very quick and easy marriage. And this is very popular in the early 20th century, and especially in states that have very lax marriage laws, like Indiana. This way, people could travel to these states, get married quickly, and leave and go home same day. Now, these businesses were run like a factory. They were processing couples very quickly and easily, you know, in and out, in and out. And a lot of businesses were interconnected to provide and expedite a wedding. So people would arrive at the town on a train. A taxi would pick them up from the train station, and the taxi would have a deal with certain ministers. They deliver them to the minister. And then they take them back to the train station when they're done. Now, sometimes inns or restaurants would have a deal with the minister. He's going to direct them to those inns so they can have food or maybe even lodging, stay the night. And you would have local florists, jewelers, dress shopkeepers. They're all going to be connected too because they're going to offer a discount for people arriving to get married. Now, a lot of these businesses did take advantage of young couples. In 1937, there was a Time magazine article that estimated that the basic marriage in Elkton, Maryland, which was called the marriage capital of the East, was going to cost at least $13. This is in 1937. So you had $2 for the license, $1 for the taxi ride to the minister, and $10 for the minister, who may or may not keep it. Now, taxi drivers would get a $5 commission for each couple they caught, so to speak. Now, the marriage mill term also applies to any Gretna Green that had many, many marriages. They were called a marriage mill. So it's either a business or a group of businesses that get together to provide a very quick marriage, or it's a town that just has an extraordinarily high amount of marriages. Gin marriage laws are actually very interesting because while trying to prevent people from getting married, they actually gave rise to a lot of Gretna Greens. Gin marriage laws were laws that were passed in the 1920s and 1930s that required a waiting period between the time you got your license and when you could get married. That resulted from a Prohibition era hysteria about couples getting married while drunk. You know, they figure they get drunk, they get amorous, they decide, let's get married. And later on, they say, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? This was passed in response to a rise in divorces in the 20s and 30s. And so a lot of city leaders and legislatures felt that this rise in divorces was because all these people had gotten married drunk. So they wanted to put forth these waiting periods. It was meant to be a sort of a cooling off period. However, they helped fuel exodus to other states where there was no waiting period. For example, the gin marriage laws in California created the mass migration to Las Vegas, Nevada, and Yuma, Arizona for quick marriages. They just drove people to other states. The main states that had gin marriage laws were California, Idaho, Kentucky, Missouri, Michigan, Montana, New York, Ohio, Oregon, Washington, and Wyoming. And Wyoming went a step further. Not only did you have to have a waiting period, and you had to have a blood test. A lot of these states were also doing blood tests to make sure that you didn't have syphilis. But Wyoming required a physical exam by a doctor to be given to the clerk to get a marriage license and get married. So you can see that while they tried to stop couples from getting married, it actually created a new problem because everybody went to another state, a state where there was no waiting period, a state where there would be easier marriages. Now, we've heard of some of these Gretna Greens because we still have them. They're still considered a marriage center. We have Reno and Las Vegas. Now, while they attract people from all over the country, they mainly attracted California and Arizona couples. Niagara Falls attracted people from Ontario. They would come to the American side, New York, and get married. And New York couples would go to the Ontario side to get married because they thought that the regulations were a little looser. You have Elton, Maryland. Now, they mainly drew people from New York, New Jersey, and mainly the eastern seaboard of the United States. Crown Point, Indiana drew a lot of people from Illinois, Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio. And Tishomingo County, Mississippi, they're going to draw a lot of people from Alabama and southwestern Tennessee. You can see the image on the top right is a postcard for Elkton, Maryland. It's on the main road to Elkton, Maryland, the marriage capital of the East. And you would go on the road and you'd see all of these buildings and houses with all of these signs: marriage licenses, marriages performed here, main office. And the lower maps, we have on the left, we have where Tishomingo County is located in Mississippi. It's in the upper northeast. And if you look at the map with all the states, and you can see where Mississippi is, you're going to find out that the upper northeast area is going to attract people from Alabama, which is to the east, and from southwestern Tennessee, which is directly north of it. So you can see where these places are located, where they're maybe going to get the majority of their out-of-town people from. I want to tell you this tale of Claire and Arthur. Now, a disclaimer: Claire is my great aunt, my grandfather's younger sister. And on January 9th, 1917, my great-grandfather got a phone call from a reporter in Chicago. It was a reporter for the Panagraph, which was the main newspaper in Bloomington, Illinois, where they lived. And the reporter said, Arthur Olson and Claire Phelan, both of Bloomington, took out a marriage license in Chicago today. Did you know anything about your daughter's wedding? And great-grandfather said, well, just wait a minute. Had to come back and probably tell everybody in the family. Guess what? Claire ran off and got married, went to Chicago. He came back and said that they had left on the morning train for Chicago and said they'd be back this evening. They didn't give them any idea of what their intentions were. They were just running away to get married. And the phrase was, they sure stole a march on us this time. And a march is a very old military term, basically saying you get the drop on the other side before they can get a drop on you. You surprise the enemy before they can surprise you. So Claire went on the train and they went up to Chicago. On the right, and I apologize for the condition of this, is her marriage license. And, it says, state of Illinois, Cook County, Arthur Olson and Claire Phelan, both age 23, were married the 8th day of January 1917. So there's a good chance you might find an article about your ancestor in the newspaper, and we'll be talking about that in just a minute. Where are we going to look for marriage records, Gretna Green marriage records? Start off with the search for a marriage record. You begin with family stories. Are there any family stories about an elopement and maybe where they went? You start searching for the marriage records in the county courthouse or state archives in your home state. If you don't find it in your home state, then expand out to neighboring states. Draw a 10, 15, 20, 50, 100-mile radius circle around their hometown and see what is within that circle. And then widen it if you have to, even into neighboring states. The best way to do that is to get a good historical map. Then check the local newspapers. You're going to find them on Chronicling America, Genealogy Bank, newspapers.com, newspaper archives, and the local newspapers directly. So if I was interested in finding out something about Claire, I could have gone to the Pentagraph in their archives and see if there was anything about her. Look for counties that issue more marriage licenses than the state average. The Bureau of Census, in addition to publishing population schedules, also publishes statistical information. And this is going to be very helpful for identifying possible Gretna Greens. This is from the time period from 1922 to 1926. And one of the statistics that the Census Bureau published was counties that had a marriage rate larger than the average of the state. So the rate for 1,000 of estimated population would be listed, and then if there were any outliers, they would be listed. So let's go down to Maryland. It's the last state on the left. The average for Maryland was 16.4. That's how many marriage licenses were given per 1,000 people. Cecil County in Maryland had 219. Now, right there, that sends a flag to me. It's like, why is that so much more than the state average? Well, the reason that particular one is so much more is that Elkton is in Cecil County, and Elkton, remember, publicized and called itself the marriage capital of the East. There were so many marriage licenses given in Elkton versus the whole state as a whole that should tell you that's a possible Gretna Green. You can find these reports on Hattie Trust and also Google Books. Not every year is going to be listed, but you may find years that encompass the time frame that your ancestor was getting married. Now, where are we going to look for Gretna Green marriages? Well, again, check maps for the distance to neighboring states and railroad routes. We see on the map Bloomington, Illinois. That's where Claire and Arthur lived. And we see that it is along a railroad line to Chicago. Now, they could have gone south and they could have gone to St. Louis. Chicago was a little bit closer, but you want to see if your town is on a railroad route and what other towns are also in that route. Also, you are going to be able to find some information online. Family Search Wiki under Gretna Green is the absolute best source for Gretna Green towns and states. In fact, if you don't remember anything else from this talk, just know that exists. You should look at that. Ancestry.com actually has a collection of Gretna Green marriages in Scotland. Cindy's List also has information about different Gretna Greens and about background information as a whole. Scotland's People, which is a database, you have to pay for that, also has information, database for Gretna Green. You're also going to find information about an ancestor that maybe got married in England from the UK National Archives or Find My Past. So there are various different online databases that you can start your search with. This is sort of a cut and paste sample of the Family Search Wiki on Gretna Greens. And for anybody that lived in Illinois, it shows what your possible places are. It'll tell you if your ancestor is from a state, maybe check here for a possible Gretna Green. Now, that doesn't mean they're all going to be there, but this is actually the most comprehensive one I found so far. So from anybody from Illinois, you could get married at Crown Point, Indiana. If you lived in Cook County, you could get married in St. Joseph, Michigan, or depending upon the time period, Kenosha or Waukegan, Illinois. If you were in the southeastern part of Illinois, you might want to look at Evansville, Indiana. These are places that have been known to have marriages for out-of-towners, basically your Gretna Green marriages. This is the Ancestry collection for Gretna Green, Scotland, marriage registers, 1794 to 1895. Now, this is about 40 years after the law went into effect in England. So it's not going to be very comprehensive. And if you look, there's only about 21,000 records. But if your ancestor was one of those, this is going to be priceless. This is a collection from the National Archives in England. Here you're going to have registers of clandestine marriages in Fleet Street or Fleet Prison, some other places, and also Mayfair Chapel. So there are places online that you can search for. I just want to leave you with some tips to keep in mind when you're looking for Gretna Green marriages. Try to search for the nearest Gretna Green to your home. Use maps to locate them. I would start with the Family Search Wiki one. Look at that. Arlene Urkel has an article. I have that in your handout. She gives a lot too. J. Mark Lowe, in one of his webinars, I think it's the one on legacy, also gives, his handout also gives a lot of Gretna Green marriages. Try to find as many Gretna Greens to where the home was. Use maps to see how far they are. Learn the history and the laws of your state, of the state that your ancestors lived in, and the states that's joining them. Just like I had mentioned, the relationship with Illinois and then Wisconsin went back and forth. And then people ended up going to Indiana. So you need to know when these laws went into effect. Check for marriage licenses in newspapers. Many people would get married in secret and then broadcast it to their family and friends in the local newspaper. Is the place where your ancestor lived, is it near a state line or an international border? If you were in Southern California, maybe around San Diego or so on, your ancestor might have gotten married in Tijuana. Or maybe they got married in Ontario, Canada. So again, look to see how close you are to these borders. Was the state that your ancestor lived in known as a general state, a law state? Because if that was the case, there's a good chance they didn't get married there, they got married somewhere else. See if you can locate train routes near your ancestors' homes, or maybe they got married in a town on a river. People were always passing through in and out of these river towns. Possibly they got married there. There were some specific JPs, justices of the peace, that were known as magistrates or marrying squires. And they would become famous because they would marry many, many couples. You usually find their names in newspaper articles or county histories. Emil Lindvall was very famous in Waukegan, Illinois, for marrying a lot of people. Ephraim Keigwin in Jeffersonville, Indiana. In 1931, there were 5 justices of the peace in Jeffersonville, Indiana, that joined together. They decided to join forces to cut costs, and that made all the newspapers. In Pennsylvania, you had Squire Mays and his son Joseph that had performed a lot of marriages. So if you come across a magistrate or a marrying squire, they might have kept records. So look to see if there's any information about them in a newspaper article or a county history, or maybe the County Historical Society might have records that they kept. Hopefully, you're going to be able to locate, whoops, we went all the way. That's weird. Well, let's just go back where we were. Sometimes computers are not as smart as they think they are. Anyway, what I was going to say is hopefully you're going to be able to locate some of your ancestors with these tips and information. But if you have any trouble, please feel free to contact me. My email address is myanov4@gmail.com. And if you contact me, we're going to brainstorm on how to find your ancestors' missing records. And hopefully we can come up with something. And with that, I'm very happy to answer any questions you have.
All right, very interesting talk. Let's see, I know there was one comment a little bit back here from Natalie. She said, wow, I haven't found several marriages from Hardin County, Tennessee. Tishomingo is due south, so I need to look there.
That's one place you need to look. Let me see. Tennessee is depending on where in Tennessee you could go to a lot of places. Another spot for Tennessee would be South Point in Tennessee. Look there. If you're in Southwestern, as you say, then Tishomingo. Yeah. White County, Tennessee, a lot of people went to Rome, Georgia. So like I said, download or print the Family Search Wiki article on that. And also Arlene Arkell also has an article, and she lists a lot of them. And that is in your handout. And there's also, if you have people from New York, the New York area, the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society also has a list, and that also is in your handout. So I think with the list of places, plus a really good map, you can sort of see what places might be near where your ancestor lived. Just to confirm it, look at train routes to see if there were trains going near those places. And then I would contact those places and see what kind of marriage records they have.
Oh, and by the way, I have enabled you to unmute yourselves if you would like to ask questions with your own voice, or if you would like to share your own experience with searching for ancestors married at a Gretna Green.
Madeline, this is Joyce Smith.
Hi, Joyce.
Section 11C, you have misprinted Elkton, Maryland. You've got Elkhorn.
You know what? I thought I caught all of them. That one must have flipped. I'll have to fire my editor.
Well, I am from southeastern Pennsylvania, and that was a big joke. My father said all his daughters, if they wanted to go to Elkton, they could go, and he would give them the money that it would have cost for the marriage. None of us did.
Well, thanks for catching the typo.
Looks like Ann Burrows has her hand up. Ann?
Yes, Madeline, thank you. I enjoyed your talk. The only marriage that I have found with that is sort of Gretna Green related. My parents were married in Carson City, Nevada.
You know what?
Yeah.
Carson City actually was another Gretna Green. It wasn't just Las Vegas, and it wasn't just Yuma for people that were in California. You had Carson City, I think Virginia City too.
Reno, was it Reno?
Reno was mainly for Northern California.
Oh, okay. Yes, they were in Southern California when they got married, and so I guess that's why they went to Carson City. But it was thrilling to find the actual certificate. I've got the actual certificate from when they got married. So,
well, that's cool.
Carson City my mom
was oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I just wanted to finish by saying my mom was married before, and so that's why they went. They eloped, was because she didn't care about another marriage ceremony, and I guess that my dad didn't either. I never really talked to them about it, but that's the reason why they eloped. So,
yeah, and other Western Gretna Green towns, besides Carson City, you had Virginia City in Nevada. You had Walla Walla, Washington, And there was an Elkton, Oregon too. So those were all small little Western ones.
Mm.
So that is cool. I'm glad you shared that. Thank you.
Well, do I have any more questions? Anyone interested in sharing anything?
We see now they're all gonna download those articles so they can get the list of Gretna Greens, and they're all gonna get out their maps, and we'll have to rejoin in a couple months to see how much progress you've made.
Madeline, sometime around 1900, and I want to say it was a little bit before, but maybe it was a little bit after, but only by a couple years.
No, that's about right. That's about right, because Carson City and Virginia City were Gretna Greens in the very late 19th century. So that would be the right time frame.
Well, I was going to add something else. I have a great aunt that my grandmother's youngest sister. There were 4 girls in the family, and this is the youngest. And the family did not want her to marry the man she married. And so one of her other sisters, who was still unmarried, and the one aunt was her chaperone, and the 2 of them went up to Canada, and the youngest girl did what she wanted to do, and I think it was a big mistake from what I can find out. But they went up to Canada. I don't know exactly where, and it ended up in California eventually. So
very good.
Well, let's see. While we're waiting for another question, I'm gonna get a shameless plug in for our next month's genealogy presentation. It will be on December 16th, again on a Saturday at 1 o'clock. Its title is "Did Your Ancestor Attend Church? Researching in Religious Records." And the speaker will be Lisa Escarell, who we've had before. So that should be very interesting. That's December 16th. Any other questions? Comments? Stories? Hey, well, we're getting some nice some thank yous. Comment that the handout was very detailed. Yeah, some very nice thank yous. I will send you a transcript, just like I did last time. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and post the handout and the URL for this for the recording for this talk one last time. This talk will be posted and left up indefinitely on our library's YouTube channel. Okay, let's get that handout posted one last time for anyone who's missed it. There's the handout. And you can always email me at contact@saclibrary.org if for some reason you were not able to download it. And there is the address for our YouTube channel, and then below that is the email address that you can contact me through, contact@saclibrary.org. Okay, any last question? Here's your last chance. Okay, well, thank you very much, Madeline. As always, it was a very interesting talk.
My pleasure.
And we're ending.